My name is Lisa. I'm 30 and I'm a data scientist and I work remotely for tech startups. I spend most of my time in Mexico and the other part of my time in Toronto. And I live a life that is by design, and I've chosen my lifestyle, and it feels very powerful to be in this place where everything I do is from intention, and that's why I'm here. I grew up in Toronto, and I have a pretty standard upbringing. My parents were pretty normal. I'd say the only thing that was different about my upbringing from most of my peers was that my parents always encouraged me to do whatever I felt was right. So if I made a mistake, they wouldn't really scold me. They would just teach me how to learn from that mistake. And I feel like that has shaped a lot of the way that I live my adult life. I was always interested in mathematics and drama. So as a kid, I took a lot of acting classes and then just also really excelled in mathematics. So yeah, those were my two loves. And I guess when I was in elementary school, I was kind of bullied a little bit from a lot of the girls that were around me. And that kind of started a bit of insecurity and just sadness. And I think it, must be caused by other things as well. But I think that's kind of where I started to grow. The seeds were planted for depression and anxiety. And when I was in high school, it kind of went like full on. I went to an art Catholic high school and I was studying drama, and the girls that were around me were, I'm friends with some of them still now. They're great people, but I think that there was something about the attitude in high school that I just didn't understand why people weren't loving to each other and to me, and there seemed to be a lot of harm and drugs being used in a not very intentional way. And I found myself being depressed but didn't really know it. And when I was 15, in one of my acting classes, we were taught how to practice yoga. And that was the only thing that I found that made me feel happy and bring me out of this depression. So it was my own way of self-medicating my depression. So I continued doing yoga from age 15 and all throughout high school and then university. So I went to university, I studied mathematics, and I started to get panic attacks. So it got to the point where I would want to get perfect on every math test. So if I didn't get perfect, I would have a panic attack. Or if I felt like I didn't know the answer to something, I'd have a panic attack. And it became super debilitating. And rather than taking medication, which is what my doctors told me I should do, they wanted me to go on lorazepam, which is a very strong anti-anxiety medication. So rather than taking that, I wanted to find other solutions to what was happening to my being. So I started to study the mind and the mind-body connection, and just did research on how to use my breath and my body to match what was happening with my mind. And I was able to stop myself from getting panic attacks, which was really cool. And then after I did a master's, I went traveling to India and did a yoga teacher training. And I remember experiencing joy for the first time since I was a kid in India on my 25th birthday, walking through the Himalayan mountains. And it was really beautiful, and I felt like I was happy traveling and breaking away from this structured society that I had lived in for my whole life. It was my first experience stepping outside of that. So it was stepping outside of this context that we're born into, and we're almost taught that this is the way that you should live. And you know, it's rooted in like a denial, addiction, survival kind of context, where we're always, you know, playing with those three things rather than being in like a loving, free context. So I experienced that for my first time, and then came back to Toronto, got a job, and was living in, you know, regular society again for about a year before I hit my rock bottom. And that was me getting to a place where I had so much anxiety and so much depression that it hurt to exist. And I checked myself into the psych ward and was there for a week, and that's when I decided to dedicate my life to, or dedicate my energy and my time to figuring out how to live my life so I wouldn't have to be in that context again. So my path to living a more free, happy life kind of started in that moment, and I just read a bunch of books and realized that it was yoga that was kind of keeping me afloat, and yoga helped because it was connecting my mind, body, and my spirit. It brought me to this place where my ego wasn't on hyperdrive. My ego was tamed. I felt more connected to everything, other people as well as nature. And so I used yoga for a lot of that, and then did a bunch of research, and eventually started dabbling in psychedelics. So I had tried MDMA when I was a teenager, not in like a very intentional way, just for fun, going to parties. I remember my first time trying mushrooms. That was my first psychedelic that I'd had, if you don't consider MDMA a psychedelic. And it really scared me because I have a grandmother that's was schizophrenic. So I always thought that like if I was to do psychedelics, I would become schizophrenic. It was this kind of irrational correlation that I had made in my brain. And I already realized that I had struggles with mental health. And so doing psychedelics for the first time was a very big deal for me. I went to my friend's cottage, and I just remember experiencing nature in a way that, I mean, I'd never experienced it like that before. I felt so connected to it and blissful, and it was, you know, it left me with this feeling that was similar to the state that I would be after I'd had a really intense yoga practice. And so then I started to do research on the healing properties of psychedelics, and how they should be taken with intention if you want to use them to heal yourself or explore or just be on a conscious path. So I wanted to try more psychedelics. So eventually I tried LSD, and it wasn't until I had an unintentional LSD trip. So I was in the middle of Mexico City with a bunch of friends, and I didn't know it, but I had accidentally consumed a lot of LSD, and I didn't know it until I was high and wondering what was going on with me, and then realized that I had taken a bunch of LSD. And so I'd always wanted to be in control, and I I never would have taken as much as I had taken, but it was a blessing in disguise, because that was that was like the first of two very powerful moments with psychedelics for me. So I realized that I don't know, I just saw the world from a different angle. So I realized like how much harm we're doing to other like animals with factory farming, and like this was a big theme for my trip, and it brought me closer to everything else, plants, animals, other people, and through that it was healing myself, because it made me realize that there's nothing really wrong with any of us. We're all one, and we're all connected, and this ego just gets in the way of it sometimes. So that was a very, very healing experience with psychedelics, and made me realize that I wanted to go a little bit deeper. So a few months later, I was doing some work with a couple teachers in Mexico, and decided to take a course with them. And it was a 5-day intensive course all about how to switch from this denial, addiction, survival context into a context that's filled with more love and is more free, and just something that you can, or a state where you can enjoy your life. And I feel like not a lot of people are able to be in that state for most of their life. So I took this 5-day course with them, and it was all about like movement and processing emotions and not denying them, using them as signals, and then getting rid of them and ending up in this state of perfect like peace and love and joy. And they would teach me these rituals or like ways to move and things to do, and then at the end of that I would be in this state of just like oneness and happiness, and I was blissed out. And so they taught me how to get there. And then about a week and a half later, I decided I wanted to practice toad with them, or not practice, but do like a toad ceremony with them. So toad it's the venom from a toad that comes from the Sonoran Desert. And you smoke the toad, and it's very difficult to describe what happens, but it's in the psychedelic family. It lasts, the first part of it lasts for about 5 minutes, and that's the part where your consciousness leaves your body and you're in a different dimension. And that's a whole experience. And then you come back, and for about 45 minutes after that, you're conscious and you're aware and you're in your body, but you are in this state where you completely and totally feel and know that we're all connected and we're all one. So toad is very powerful medicine, and after taking this course, I don't know what it was, I was just like drawn to try it, to learn, to like pursue, to like take myself one step further on my path. So it was just me and my 2 guides, and we set intentions, and then they laid me out in their garden, and I smoked the toad, and within 3 seconds I had fallen back, and my whole universe just went and and it just like fractaled out, and I was like blasted into a different dimension. So I was there for apparently 4 minutes. I don't have a lot of memory of being in that state. I just have like these random flashes of what it was like. I remember just fractals and sounds and time didn't have any meaning. There was no concept of time. And then my consciousness came back to my body, and I started to become aware and feel my body. And my teachers were like making music and massaging my arms to try to like bring me back. And eventually I stood up and walked into the garden, and I was in that second phase. And I remember just looking up at the sky and thinking, oh my God, I've been in this state before. This is what my teachers have been teaching me to get to this state. Every time I do, you know, some of the movements or like process emotions or like any of the techniques that they had taught us in this course, it was always to bring me back to the state. So the first thought that I remember having was that I've been here before, and this was a familiar state. It's also a state that I get to when I have a really intense yoga practice, or that feeling of joy when I was walking through the mountains in the Himalayas. It was all connected to this state. But I now have a new understanding of what that state is, and that's our default. So our default as humans or as beings on this planet is to be in complete unity with everything, to be aware that we are one, that you are God and I am God, or whatever you want to call it. But once you become aware of that, it's like nothing, like depression doesn't matter, anxiety doesn't matter. It's like you just know everything is going to be okay no matter what, and there's nothing wrong with you, like no question about it. And so I feel like all of the work that I had done in my life was learning that I'm okay no matter what, and there's nothing wrong with me, and there's nothing wrong with anyone, and we're all like all of that, and that we're all connected and we're all one. Those were lessons that I learned from the top down, but taking Toad in an intentional way, and like what other psychedelics had helped me learn as well, was from the bottom up. And so those two combined just gave me this like complete and whole understanding, so that now I can go into that state like anytime. Like I can sit here and just enjoy everything, like enjoy the birds chirping and just look up at the trees and like wonder because we're connected to everything. Like the only thing that separates us as humans is our ego. So like me experiencing another human is just this oneness experiencing itself from a different angle. And looking at the context that our society says that we should live in just completely denies that we're connected. And I think that's where my struggles came from. That's where the anxiety and the depression came from. And just learning that that's not, I mean, there's a time like you have to live in a society, and if that's the way most people are living, you have to learn to interact with it. But just knowing in the background that everything's gonna be okay and there's nothing wrong with us and everything's great, and like just everything's gonna be fine no matter what. And that's probably one of the most powerful lessons that I've learned, or things that I've discovered. I don't even want to say it's a lesson, because it's almost like it's like something I've just like remembered, or like I woke up to remembering this. But it has completely changed my life, and I haven't suffered from depression in a few years now, but it just, I don't know, I feel like psychedelics have helped me learn how to live a happy life. So I know there's some research going on now with psychedelics for therapeutic use. I'm really happy to see that they're researching it, because I mean, my experience is it's just anecdotal. And I think that, you know, I know a lot of people also that have really benefited and had their lives improved from using psychedelics in an intentional way to heal. But from my anecdotal experiences, psychedelics just have this ability to not mask a problem, but either bring the problem to a head, and so you're facing it rather than denying the problem, and then you can deal with it. Or it just shows you that this problem actually isn't a problem and doesn't really exist, and it's only in your brain. And so psychedelics and intention are really powerful tools to actually fixing your life and whatever issues you're having. And especially with the end-of-life therapy, I've heard a lot about research going on there, and just from my own experiences, after after doing Sapo and having this feeling of like everything's going to be okay no matter what, that includes after death. Like, it wasn't just in this life everything's going to be okay, it's in like all eternity everything's going to be okay. And not just me, with everyone.